regard health and life and health as one of the most fundamental human goods. It's basic to who we are. Without life and health, we don't exist. So caring for a person's health, respecting a person's life, these are the ways in which we respect and care for people. And so it's one of the basic goods, and we understand it not as what they call an instrumental good. It's not a means to some other end, but being alive is who I am as a person, as a living person. So I think that's an important aspect as well. And in the case then of healthcare, this is part of our responsibility to take reasonable care of our life. Now, we're not obliged to go to extraordinary lengths to look after our life, but we're expected to do what's reasonable and normal and ordinary to stay healthy and to receive what medical treatment is needed to help particular illnesses or injuries. And it's through respecting life and health that we respect the person. So it's the dignity of the human being, dignity of the human person. That's I guess the fundamental insight that we have. Look, I guess most of us probably don't like thinking about death, but death is the natural ending of human lives. We don't live our earthly life forever. And I guess what's changed most is the development of modern medicine. I mean, in the past, when a person suffered a major illness or injury, there really wasn't much we could do to prevent death if that was coming. But nowadays, with modern medicine, we are in fact able to treat all sorts of illnesses and injuries. We can extend people's lives remarkably, as we're doing. But that then raises the question of what are the limits to this? Medicine has created the situation where there's all sorts of possibilities for what we could do in theory to extend someone's life, but there's a human question about whether we should do that or not. The other, I suppose the other development is that, partly because of modern medicine, that people will often now be alive but no longer able to make their own decisions. So modern medicine can keep the person alive, but perhaps through dementia or through a loss of consciousness or some other debilitating illness, the person's actually not able to express their own wishes or to make their own decisions. Now, in that situation, someone else will make the decision. The law will designate someone. Perhaps it's the next of kin, perhaps it's a family member. It might be the person that has been appointed as the medical guardian and so on. Someone will make a decision, and so it's important to guide that person. And therefore, as individuals, that we think about what would be important to me in that phase of my life. What treatments would I find acceptable? What treatments would I find unacceptable because they're burdensome to me or to other people? And that goes with the principle of taking reasonable care. You know, that I'm not obliged, as I say, to do everything to prolong my life. And particularly when treatments become futile, that they're no longer effective, or when they become overly burdensome. So that's to say that might be the side effects of the treatment, it might be the cost of the treatment, you know, extraordinarily expensive treatment that I really don't want to spend my money on, or other burdens. So at that point it's actually right to say that's enough, it's time to allow death to come. So thinking about this and planning ahead is really part of good stewardship. It's part of caring for the gift of life. You know, for those of us who are Christians, we think of life as God's gift, something we care for, we look after the gift, but we realise our limits. And we're not, as I say, we're not obliged to do everything absolutely possible to simply prolong life. It's the planning rather than the plan that I think is important. And this new document, which Catholic Healthcare has prepared, it helps people think about the issues that are relevant to their future care. And in some ways, thinking about them and talking about them is probably more important than writing out a plan. And in thinking about what's important, there are simply medical issues that treatments and side effects and so on that a person would find acceptable. But there are also all the other aspects of what's important to a person, their values. They might want time with their family. It could be more important for a person that whatever time they have left, they spend comfortably at home with their family, rather than spend their last 3 weeks in a high-tech hospital hooked up to machines. And that's a perfectly legitimate choice, because that's what matters. It could be that a person, that they want to remain conscious so that they can engage in their own religious activities. They might be willing to put up with a little bit of pain at times and remain conscious so they can talk to their family and friends. It's going to vary. Some people might say, look, I can't handle pain, make sure I feel nothing. There are differences in what people value. It could be that someone, they really want to be alive for their daughter's wedding or for the arrival of their son from overseas. And so that'd be a good reason for trying to do everything we can to help the person stay alive for that event. So there are going to be all these different reasons why, as to what matters for people, and therefore how you plan their medical treatment around that. So as I said, I think what's important above all is speaking with your family and friends or with the people who are going to represent you so that they know what matters to you and what's important. Because when a difficult situation arises, perhaps when a person's no longer conscious, then the representatives are going to need to respond to the particular circumstances, and they need some flexibility in that. So our plan is not a directive. It doesn't specify this must happen in this order, but it explains to the representatives and thereby explains to the doctors what's important to the person, what they would want, and the doctors and the representatives can then try to tailor their treatment to meet those wishes in the circumstances. I think it's important for patients' representatives to know that ultimately the doctors take responsibility for the treatment decisions. For example, if it's a decision to stop some form of treatment or a decision not to provide a certain treatment, ultimately the doctors have that responsibility. But we can help them. The patient can help them, the representative can help them by sharing with them their understanding of what the patient would have wanted. And I think the challenge for the doctors is that, first of all, they want a representative whom they can speak to. The doctor's wanting to do what's best for the patient, and therefore the doctor wants to know from the patient or their representative what would the patient want in this circumstance. The challenge then, I think, for doctors is to avoid two extremes. On the one hand, to be over-treating the patient, and on the other hand, to be under-treating the patient. And it's possible to err in both directions. And so the challenge for the doctor really is to recognise what's the appropriate treatment at this point. Now, as a person comes to the end of their life, normally it's appropriate to stop invasive or aggressive treatments that are really not going to have any therapeutic curative effect. It's the time to start those other treatments, which are palliative, which make the person comfortable. So I think the important thing for doctors is never to abandon the patient, but to explain to the patient that if this treatment is no longer appropriate, then there's another form of care or treatment that is appropriate. There's a view in the community at times that palliative care is the end of things. You call for the palliative care when a person only has a day or two to live. And that's really a mistake. And as I say, the evidence is that it's far better to involve the palliative medicine experts early in one's course of treatment, and because this in fact makes the primary treatment more effective. And normally there's a sort of a trajectory, I suppose, that perhaps in the early stages of a terminal condition, that most of the person's treatment will be specialist, oncology perhaps, treating cancer. And there'll be a small amount of palliative treatment to assist the main oncology treatment. And then as the illness progresses and the person approaches death, gradually the palliative treatment increases and the oncology treatment decreases. And that's the normal way of approaching this. And what the studies show is that when it's approached in that way, using good palliative care as well as a person's own existing treatment, in fact this prolongs people's lives significantly. The Church is interested in future care planning because it's trying to help everyone, the whole of the society, find their way between two extreme views, both of which I think are mistaken. So on the one hand, there are some people who think we should make no plans at all. We should simply live our lives, we die when we die, it's all up to God. The other extreme, which is probably more common in our culture now, puts all the emphasis on personal autonomy. And so among those people who are arguing for legalised euthanasia, for example, the basic reason why they want euthanasia is because they say, I have the right to decide when my life ends. For them it's an issue of control. It's not actually an issue of pain and suffering. It's primarily about controlling their lives. Now, the Church's position is in between those two positions. So the Church's position is that God has given us intelligence and understanding and the ability to make decisions and to take responsibility for our lives. And we should take responsibility for our lives. So it's wrong to just sit back and do nothing and leave it all to God. But on the other hand, there are limits to human autonomy. And the limits are determined by the fact that life is God's gift to us. And therefore our responsibility is to take reasonable means to care for that gift. The extreme of emphasising human autonomy runs into the paradox that if a person ends their own life, then they put an end to themselves as autonomous subjects. So it's like selling yourself into slavery. There's something wrong with selling yourself into slavery. Freedom comes with limits, and the question for freedom and responsibility is the question of for what should I use my freedom? So it's not freedom of choice as an absolute in itself. We are free in order to pursue what's truly good for us. So advanced care planning, I think, is part of that good stewardship. It's part of taking responsibility for my life. It's recognising the limits of medicine, the limits of human endurance, the limits of what people can reasonably be expected to do. So it's about recognising those limits and therefore at times choosing not to have treatment or to stop a treatment. This is all perfectly reasonable and responsible, but without going to the extreme of saying that it's my right to end my life when I decide to end it. That we would see as not a legitimate option. One of the important points that's made in the planning document is that it's often difficult to make decisions for someone else. And I think we should recognise this, that it's good to appoint someone as my representative, but it's good to help that person. People, when the time comes, if I'm asked then to make decisions about whether to stop treatment for my relative, people often find this very difficult. And I think there's two important things we can do there to help them. The first is that if the person has discussed their wishes, then it's a lot easier. I know that I'm making the decision that the person I'm representing would want me to make. The other is, I think it's important to know that the ultimate responsibility for the decision is in fact taken by the doctors. So the representative is not being asked to end someone's life. The representative is making a judgment which says, look, the person wouldn't want that treatment if it's going to cause those side effects. And that's what the doctor needs to know. And the doctor then knows that this is a treatment that would be overly burdensome for the patient. And therefore, when they stop the treatment, they're not killing the patient. They're simply stopping a treatment that's no longer appropriate. The person dies because of their illness. It's not because of that the doctor's done something to end their life. Well, this document itself is not a legal document. It's not the document that appoints someone as a medical attorney or medical guardian or legal representative, but it does record who that person is. So, and it also records the person's wishes and attitudes to a number of issues. So it's highly informative for health professionals. If they look at this plan, they'll know who to speak to. And if someone has been legally appointed, they'll know who that person is. If no one has been legally appointed and it's simply the next of kin, let us say, the automatic appointee, then again, they'll know that when they read this document. But the most important thing I think in the document is that it does give us an insight into what the patient would have wanted. And that's what the doctors are wanting to know at this point of time. The difficulty with directives always is that they can be so specific that they're actually contrary to the person's best interests at the time, which is why we think it's a better thing not to give specific directives. I suppose in the case of some illnesses, it may be possible for people to have a pretty clear idea of how their illness will unfold and of what decisions may need to be made down the track. And I would think in some of those cases, the directives would probably be fairly sensible and appropriate at the time. If the person has simply given a very clear directive that a certain treatment is not to be given, then I think the Catholic hospital would have to follow that directive. Now, that's not a case of necessarily agreeing with the person's judgment, but we don't have the right to impose a treatment on someone who is refusing it. Well, that's the thing, you see, that the doctors will always have that responsibility, and to that extent, the whole language of directives is misleading, as if they're somehow automatically going to be followed without anyone thinking whether they're appropriate or not. The doctors have to think about whether they're appropriate, and are they applicable in the circumstance that the patient was imagining. Now, unless they were, then it'd be wrong to follow them. The challenge in writing this document was to try to write it in a simple, short, accessible way. We have a much longer document that's much more technical, that ethicists would find acceptable. The challenge here was to say it in a simple way that said sufficient but not too much, and would genuinely help ordinary people who are not studying philosophy. So that I think was the challenge, and I mean, I think honestly we've done pretty well, but you know, no doubt people will argue about that. I think it will be important as we go forward with this to review how well the document's working. Is it helping people, patients, doctors, health professionals? Do they find that as a result of reading this, they do have good discussions and they're able to use this as a way of expressing their wishes? So I think a review in a year or so will be very important to know, can we improve this? And is there a better way of encouraging the process? Because I think it's true, isn't it, that we don't see the document as an end in itself. It's not like publishing a book. It's a document which is to help people have a discussion, talk to their representatives, think about what they would want, think about what would be important to them. That's the most important thing here, not the bit of paper, and not even the signature for that matter.